Okay, if you've just joined, again, thank you for being with us tonight while we share the resources that Street Law has to help you celebrate Constitution Day. Our goal tonight is really just to help make your planning easier and to have a dialogue back and forth about what you need and what we can do to help you have a great engaging lesson on Constitution Day. This is our agenda tonight. We'll do a quick welcome. We want you to know who we are. We want to know who you are. And then Shalina, who I'll introduce in a moment, will give you a little bit of history of what Constitution Day is in case it's a new concept to you. We're going to highlight these 5 resources that Street Law has. Really, I think everything we do at Street Law can be traced back to the Constitution. But we're going to highlight these 5, a rule of law for all curriculum, legal timelines, landmark cases, SCOTUS in the classroom, and moot courts. And then we're hoping to leave a lot of time for Q&A so that we can have that back and forth about what you hope to do in your classroom on Constitution Day and what we have that best fits your needs. And then we'll just have a little bit of information about, like, if you want to stay in touch with us so that you can know about the new things we're doing, you can be able to do that. Okay, the first thing we always like to do on a Street Law webinar is make sure that you know who Street Law is. My guess is since you found us tonight, you already do. But we are a global, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. You can see our vision, mission, and core values there. But mostly we're here to help make sure that law-related and democracy education is happening, both in schools and in communities in our country and around the world. We're going to take a moment to tell you who we are. I will throw it over to Shalina in just a second. Shalina teaches in DC Public Schools, and we're really honored that she is our 2023 Classroom Champion, which is like our Teacher of the Year. So Shalina, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. Shalina Warren. I teach at the Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. I am the lead social studies teacher there, and I am over the Eleanor Holmes Norton Law and Public Policy Academy, and I'm excited to be here tonight with you all.
Thanks, Shalina. We're really happy that she's here tonight to be our voice in the classroom. She's used a lot of our materials, and she'll be able to tell you what it's like when you use them actually in your classroom. I'm Kathy Ruffing. That's my title. It's kind of long. Mostly I do the teacher PD and the curriculum stuff, including most of our Supreme Court stuff and our textbooks. We have a government textbook and a law textbook. I taught for 27 years in Fairfax County Public Schools, and this is my second career, and I've been at Street Law now for 5 years. So this is set up as a webinar, not a meeting. So these are the ways you'll be able to communicate. You can put things in the chat if you have questions for us, if there are technical issues that are going on you want us to know about. We also have Ben Marsh with us. He's showing up on your screen as Street Law Webinar. He is driving the technology bus tonight, so he'll see if you put that you're having tech issues in the chat. You can also feel free to dialogue with other participants. That's fine too if you want to throw a question out to the group. For the Q&A, if you want to go ahead and ask questions in the moment, you certainly don't have to wait for the Q&A portion to ask questions. So if something pops in your head and you want to ask it, we'll try to make sure that we're monitoring the Q&A. But whatever questions we don't get to during the webinar, we'll definitely make sure we address during the Q&A section. You can also upvote questions. If you see that someone else has asked a question, you're like, I'd really like to know the answer to that. And you can also comment with follow-up questions. We're going to do a couple polls. It would be great to be able, if you are able to participate in the polls, but if whatever technology you're using doesn't allow you to do that, please always feel free to drop your answer in the chat. as opposed to using the actual poll. I see a question that says, oh, Ben just answered your question, so I won't read it aloud. Okay, we'd really like to know who you are. So we're going to ask you to do two things. We're going to ask you in the chat to write your name, school, city, and state. Because you know, a lot of times you see people in the chat that you know. I just saw some people who came to the Supreme Court Summer Institute last year, so I see some names that I recognize in the chat. It's always nice to know that. So go ahead and drop your name, school, city, state in the chat. And we'd also like you to take a quick poll that asks you who is here. So the first question asks you about how you would best describe yourself, what kind of a teacher or administrator or other. And if you scroll down, and I'm mentioning this because you might miss question 2, it just asks how many years of experience you have. So what we'd really like to do is to tailor what we're talking about tonight to what you teach and maybe where you are on the experience spectrum. So these things will help Shalina and I be able to try to tailor what we're saying to who's in the room. So I'll give you a couple moments to do the poll. We have people from all over. This is great.
Oh wow.
Thank you for everyone who's joining us in the different time zones. It's hard to pick a time zone that works for everybody. So here on the East Coast, it's dinner time, and there on the West Coast, you're probably just got students out the door. So we appreciate all of you in the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
Attending a PD after a day of school, especially at the beginning of the school year when you're not quite back in shape for all day teaching is really appreciated.
Yes, indeed.
So I'm going to end the poll in a moment. The responses have slowed, so perhaps everyone who's able to take the poll has taken it. Again, if you're not able to take the poll based on the technology, you can always just drop your answers in the chat. And again, the questions were, you know, like basically what type of a teacher are you, and then how much experience do you have? Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So probably not surprisingly, we have a lot of government and civics teachers. They tend to be the people who are most in our fold. Some law teachers, which are great. When I was in the classroom, I taught AP Government and Law, and Shalina teaches law and is the head, I'm using the wrong word, but of their law academy. What's your title, Shalina?
Academy director.
Correct. Okay. We have some history teachers. That's great. We're excited to tell you about one of our resources that really is directly helpful to history teachers, maybe more than things that we have offered in the past. And we love our middle school teachers. So great. Thank you. Oh, and an elementary school teacher. That's great. We have been developing things for elementary school teachers for the first time in the last about year and a half, 2 years. And as far as experience level, I think we have a nice bell curve there all over the map, which is great. So please feel free to, and university professors I see in the chat. So that's great. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Oops, there's my please take the poll. We already did that. Okay, Shalina.
Hey. All right, so when and what is Constitution Day? Constitution Day became a national observance in 2004 when Senator Robert Byrd passed a bill designating September 17th as the day for citizens to commemorate the signing of the U.S. Constitution and learn more about our founding documents. Senator Byrd once said, and I quote, "Our ideals of freedom set forth and realized in our Constitution are our greatest export to the world," end quote. He added the Constitution Day clause to his 2004 federal spending bill because he believed that all citizens should know about their rights as outlined in the Constitution. This clause mandates the teaching of the Constitution in schools that receive federal funds as well as federal agencies. So I'm sure when I looked at the years of experience, many of us here have been teaching for the years that this bill has been in existence. And I know you probably had to submit lessons, had to work as a department to create events for September 7th for Constitution Day. And so we're just continuing that with the resources that Street Law has to offer.
Thanks. So as I mentioned before, I kind of think that everything we do at Street Law can be tied to the Constitution, but we're going to really highlight these 4/5 things. So before we do this, we want you to take another poll if you're able. We're curious how familiar you are with Street Law resources. So I just launched another poll that asks how familiar you are. I'm just saying this for the people who maybe can't see the poll. You can drop it in the chat. If you are very familiar, pretty familiar, only acquainted, or you don't know about our resources at all. And again, we're hoping to have this be able to help us tailor a little bit if it's overwhelming. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results because I feel like most people have answered it. So it looks like we're all over the place, which is great. Won't change how we present, I guess, very much. But it's good to know that people are sort of all over the place. And for those of you who aren't familiar at all with our resources, thanks really for coming. And hopefully you'll learn about them and start to use them. So awesome. Okay. We're going to start with the rule of law for all curriculum. We could have started in any order, but I kind of like starting with this one because if you're starting your year, which probably a lot of people are based on the fact that if you're teaching civics or law, you might be starting with just sort of like, how does the Constitution, any constitution in any country, any list of plan for how government's going to be run fit into the principles of government. So probably in chapter 1 of your law or government book, it talks about the principles of government in the United States. And one of those principles is often rule of law. But at Street Law, we realize that sometimes that's sort of where the conversation ends. Like, here's rule of law, here's the definition, something about everybody following the same rules and leaders also being subject to those rules and rules being fair. But then that's sort of where it ends. So we received a grant to build a whole curriculum around rule of law. And there are especially 3 lessons. Again, I think they all go back to the Constitution, but might really help you with your teaching of the Constitution. And I chose these 3 lessons to highlight because they also sort of highlight where in your curriculum they might fit. So we'll drop a link to the rule of law curriculum, but all of these things can be found in our Street Law resource library. Ben, can you drop the link to the Street Law resource library and then the link to rule of law for all, please? So those will be coming in your chat momentarily. So the first lesson that I'd like to highlight for you is the actual introduction to the rule of law, and it is a hexagonal thinking activity. So please feel free to drop in the chat if you've used hexagonal thinking and what kinds of lessons you've used it for. This might be a new strategy for some people. It's really an interesting activity that I learned about, frankly, after I was out of the classroom. But I've done a lot of work with teachers with it, and it allows you to put out concepts. So in this case, these are the different parts of the rule of law, like fundamental rights and no corruption and fair and effective courts. And then some other concepts. And it allows students to figure out how they fit together. And one of the really cool things I think about hexagonal thinking is that there's no right or wrong way. Usually you group students and they look at the terms. They have to maybe look at look at a list of vocabulary to make sure they understand the terms, and then they think, how do these terms all fit together? And so this would be a great lesson to do if you were just sort of introducing the Constitution and you were trying to not delve into all the different articles and amendments yet, but you just sort of want your students to understand how the Constitution really fits into rule of law. And some of these hexagons, I know it's too small. I wouldn't expect you to be able to read them all, but some of these hexagons are directly related to the Constitution. So that powers are restricted by the Constitution. And by the way, the Constitution is not capitalized there because we're talking about constitutions in general in the rule of law, not necessarily the US Constitution. The powers are limited. Of course, that's a big part of what the Constitution does. Fundamental rights, separation of powers. The law applies to all in fair and effective courts. And I see that Jennifer Washington's saying that she did this lesson with her classes last year. So certainly feel free, Jennifer, when we do the Q&A, or if you want to drop it in, to let us know. And Randy is also chiming in. So and if please feel free to ask them questions if you'd like to, about how it went in their class. I think this is a fantastic activity. It really gets kids putting their heads together and thinking. And because there is no right answer, they're not trying to Google it. They're not trying to look at the other groups and what they're doing. But it allows them to really go deep into to these concepts that are fundamental to the Constitution. Another activity, which is very different, this is an activity probably a lot of you have used either this version or a lot of other different versions. This activity has been sort of a mainstay that's been around for a very long time, but it's the aliens activity. This would be a great lesson to do if you were introducing the Bill of Rights, both what is in the Bill of Rights and what is not in the Bill of Rights, because sometimes some students think that there's more there than is there. But we're going to do this together just a little bit to give you just a tiny taste. This is an activity where you tell the students that aliens have come to Earth, that they are dominant, completely dominant. So humans have no choice but to sort of listen to what they're telling them to do. And they think that we should have some freedoms, but that they think that the 14, although you're only going to get 10 because Zoom only allowed us to put 10 in our poll, they think that the listed rights are too many. So you're going to be asked to eliminate 3 of those rights. So we're going to just give you a taste of this activity because it seems kind of like it might be an easy thing to do, but when you're forced with choosing between rights that you think are really important, sometimes it's harder. So I've launched this poll. If you want to indulge us and just take a quick look at this list of 10, again, we had to winnow down from our list of 14 because Zoom would only allow us to have 10 responses, but you can choose up to 3 to eliminate. So we'll just give you a couple minutes to do this. And you're probably, I'll talk through the lesson while you're doing it. You're probably anticipating the fact that after they eliminate 3, there's going to be an announcement from the alien overlords that say, no, you have to eliminate 3 more. Until they get down to only keeping 3 rights. And of course, it gets more difficult and more difficult each time they're asked to eliminate rights. And of course, what happens while they're talking about which ones to eliminate is they're talking about how important they all are and how fundamental they are, which is the conversation that I think is great to have happen. Whoops, there were answers and now there are not answers.
Kathy, the poll actually was only launched with single choice, but I just duplicated it and made it multiple choice if you wanted to run that again.
Oh, okay. Okay. I will share it again. Sorry if you already. It's not letting me launch it again. It's just letting me share the results.
Yeah, I think you have to share first, and then you should be able to launch the new one.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, we might have to abandon the polls because it's not wanting to let me do that even if I go through.
I can launch
That's okay.
launch the new one here.
If you can do it quickly, if not, that's okay. I'm sure people get the idea. Okay, so if you can go ahead and now that you know which ones that you're going to do, that's probably the part that takes the most time. It's always fun to see teachers eliminate education right off the bat. I think students definitely go for that one. Good, and thank you for everyone who's taking the polls. I know it's not always easy, so I appreciate it. Okay, Ben, if you want to share the results. Okay, great. So so you can see there are some that education was on the chopping block a lot, right to bear arms, got a lot of votes. So you can see that we're all over the place though, which makes for a good discussion, right? And then what will really tie this to the Constitution, and in this case, the Bill of Rights, is the follow-up activity, where they do a really close reading of the Bill of Rights and analyze it. And of course, what that will let them do is see that a lot of the rights that they felt really strongly about are in the Bill of Rights, but maybe some aren't in the Bill of Rights. There's one in there about marriage. There's one in there about equal justice under the law. So, and that is not something you're going to find in the United States Bill of Rights. So this is, if you're there in your curriculum, if you're at the Bill of Rights stage, this is a fun activity to do, and students really, really love it. It can get kind of heated though, I'm not gonna lie. And the last one, which I'll talk about just briefly, is if you're looking to do, first of all, this rule of law curriculum is always set up with a core lesson and then extensions. So one of the types of extensions for each lesson is foundational documents. And a lot of those are parts of the Constitution. So for instance, if you wanted to teach about free and effective courts, you could have your students do a Sixth Amendment analysis. So maybe if you're teaching a law elective, on that part of your curriculum where you're talking about how the courts function in the United States, there's an activity there that is just an analysis of the Sixth Amendment. And these activities are all standalone. So you can do the full lesson that's provided in the rule of law curriculum, or you can just skip straight to the lesson extension. They're standalone. So you could just use them to focus in on different parts of the Constitution. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about the rule of law curriculum. If you have questions about it, feel free to put them in the Q&A. Also, we'll have time later to chat about it. But I want to move on to one of our new, really exciting resources that we have, legal timelines. And Shalina is going to take this part of the presentation. She was one of our pilot teachers this year. So occasionally we look for teachers to pilot materials in their classrooms and then give us feedback before these materials go live. So Shalina's done a lot of work with this particular resource.
All right. So social studies teachers love timelines, right? So imagine a resource that provides interactive visual timelines that not only bring legal history, but it promotes inquiry among your students. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Street Law's Legal Timelines in American History. Since this is a webinar, what better way to let you experience the resource than with a walkthrough of the actual resource. Currently, there are 3 available on Street Law's website, with 2 coming this fall. One of the ones that I piloted is one of the ones that will be presented later this month. So you can see from this slide, federalism, suffrage, safeguards of justice, and rights of the accused are the ones that are available right now on the website. Kathy, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so legaltimelines.org. The Constitution and specific amendments figure prominently in all of the legal timelines, but especially in the federalism timeline, as it presents the division of power amongst the state and federal governments. Kathy, do you want to start showing the actual website? So when you first encounter the federalism timeline, you'll see this page. Federalism is divided up into 6 different eras, starting with pre-federalism.
I don't know why it's not working right now. Of course, because technology is that way.
Well, we can, if all else, yeah, we can go back to the slide that shows the actual, well, the timeline that we can see.
Okay.
So it starts with pre-federalism, which has the federal government and the state government both presiding over their own jurisdiction and little collaboration. And it ends with new federalism and devolution, which is the era that we're currently in, as states are reversing federalism and seeking more authority, creating decentralization. For most entries in the timelines, there's a blurb about how this date is significant, and it includes a type of resource, whether it be a linked video, a photograph, or a primary source as examples. And you can see on the screen, it shows the enumerated powers of Congress, and then you have a picture of the Constitution of the United States. And so if you went to a different date, it would show another blurb, and it would have some type of resource for your students to see and interact with. And that is what I found really influential with this resource, because students can play around with that. You can have independent practice, group work for them. Thank you, Kathy. So
yeah, this is, I'm doing the safeguards because the other one isn't loading for some reason. So I'm just, while you're speaking, I'm just gonna go through the students one. And this one, like Shalina was talking about with federalism, where it has the different parts of federalism down here on the timeline, this one has the different amendments that the rights, that safeguards of justice, rights of the accused pertain to. So obviously all constitutional amendments, so also really tied to the Constitution. And as Shalina mentioned, sometimes there are little videos that take you into a little bit deeper dive.
Kathy, whenever you're ready, you can go back to the next slide, the learning activities. So by clicking, thank you, Kathy. By clicking on the learning activities from the Timelines webpage, you'll see that each timeline has inquiry paths that include primary source documents. Virtually all can be connected to the Constitution in some way, but these have the most direct connections. Each inquiry pack includes background reading, several primary sources, such as documents, articles, images, discussion questions, an inquiry question, and an inquiry extension question. For the topic of federalism, there are 4 inquiry packs, as you can see displayed on this slide. The one that we are going to feature tonight is Federalism in the Constitution. For this inquiry pack, the inquiry question is, which rules about the division of power between the federal government and the states are clear? What constitutional provisions may cause conflict or uncertainty? And as we scroll through the inquiry pack, we're going to try. Notice how students will be asked to observe, reflect, and question using the sources presented to them. Let's look at an example, please.
Yeah, so, and where you find the inquiry packs are below the timeline itself. If you scroll down, you'll see them. So like Shalina just said, you're going to see me select the Federalism and the Constitution inquiry pack.
All right, so as I said earlier, it includes an inquiry question, primary sources, and an extension tool. It also includes a graphic organizer for your students and questions to consider from the Library of Congress analysis tool. So, and then, like I said, notice where they're asking students with the sources to observe, reflect, and question. You can see that as Kathy is scrolling through the pack. But since we are actually featuring this inquiry pack, if we can go back to the slide, Kathy, you'll see the Supremacy Clause in the 10th Amendment and the 14th Amendment and incorporation. In observing, what do you notice about these three sources? What questions might you have about these sources? Let's take a minute and use the chat and give us your response. What do you notice about these three sources? Or what questions do you have? Few more seconds to see if you have any observations or questions to add. Now we can move on. Okay, Kathy, we can move to the next slide. So on this slide, you have the two inquiry packs and timelines that you can use to teach about the Constitution. Specifically, you have Safeguard of Justice that features student learning more about the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments in relation to the rights of the accused. And then for the suffrage inquiry pack and timeline, you focus more on the history of voting rights as you feature the 19th Amendment. So these are also available in addition to the federalism inquiry pack that we just looked at. And Kathy showed the Safeguards of Justice timeline just a minute ago in our discussion.
Yeah, one of the questions was somebody put in chat, can we demonstrate how to use the timelines? So the timelines can be used a couple different ways. You can have students can pull through the timeline. So if they're looking for a specific period of time, they can look for, a certain event, a certain date that things are happening. You can use this little icon here to make these stretched out more so that you can see them, because when when the full timeline is shown, they get a little bunched up. And then you can also scroll through this way if you want to sort of just take more of a stroll through what's happening, what's going on. And again, with this one, I think one of the things I really like about it is that you can see down at the bottom the different amendments and, whether this is a 4th Amendment issue or a 6th Amendment issue. So you could give your students sort of like a scavenger hunt, go see all of the things that happened with the 6th Amendment. We have a third year of funding for this, and one of the things we're going to do is come up with more activities where teachers can sort of send their kids to the timeline to actually do something, as opposed to sort of using it more with the teacher coming up with a question or just looking through, how things happen. I did want to mention that when you click on these, you can, or here it is. These all have the source, and it will help you to go look at the whole source. If you want to really, if that's too small, you want to see what it really says, you want to go into more depth, you can do that. Also, if there's an inquiry pack like Shalina was just highlighting for you that deals with this specific issue, it will tell you the related inquiry pack, and you can go straight to the inquiry pack. So students also could say, if they come upon Gideon and they think, oh, that's really interesting, then they'd be taken to the inquiry pack that tells them about, how that asks about the proper balance between the rights of the accused and public safety. And they would come across more information about Gideon in this way.
Thank you, Kathy.
And there are either 5 or 6 inquiry packs for each ones. These are just the ones that we thought had the biggest connection to the Constitution, since we're talking about Constitution Day.
So the next 2 slides show a sneak peek into the 2 timelines and inquiry packs that will be available later this month. This one in particular, Students' Rights, a legal timeline of the rights of students. I actually piloted within my classroom with my 12th grade students. And going back to the timeline, they actually took, they chose a time within the timeline, and they had to research it even further and really discuss how it related to them as young people and how it relates to education. And so I think that was very pertinent for them, really getting them engaged. And so this is something that you can do, because religion, speech, search and seizure, education, all of that relates to what is going on in today's time. So really, engaging your students into what is really affecting them, and them understanding the why and how they fit into all of that. And then lastly, you have the presidential powers inquiry pack and timeline. This focuses on presidential power, executive orders, and privileges. Your students will be interested in this and learning about, what's going on with the president, why he is able to do what he's able to do, and how it affects us. And that is the legal timeline.
And for our history teacher friends, hopefully the President George Washington one is a good one that you can slide in there. And these should be done by, should be available to the public very shortly. So at the end, we're going to talk to you about how to keep in touch with us. And one way is social media, one way is our e-newsletters. And both of those things will be screaming from the mountaintops when these go live. I just want to talk briefly about landmark cases. So a lot of you might know landmark cases, even if you didn't know that we were behind it with the Supreme Court Historical Society. But landmark cases is another website that we host. And we've recently updated all of the content and updated its look. So I want to mention that, because if you've been there before, you definitely need to go back, because it has a new look. This is what it looks like now. It is much snazzier. And during the pandemic, when we were doing it, when we were updating the content anyway, and adding 3 new cases, we also realized that there was a need to have the site be both student facing and teacher facing. So you might know that this used to be very much a teacher facing site. You went there to get materials that you would then pass out in your classroom. But during the pandemic, we said this needs to be a site where teachers can send their students to do work. And be able to just upload it into a learning management system or something. And so now when you go to any of these cases, you'll see that you have an option to choose if you are a student or a teacher. and the site looks different based on if you're a student or a teacher. And these has so much information both at the middle school and high school level about each one of these classes, each one of these cases. There are many, many learning activities about the case and then the importance of the case after the decision. We do and can do a whole hour on landmark cases. I just wanted to mention it when we talk about Constitution Day, because you might want to zero in on a certain part of the Constitution. Like you'll see there's a lot of First Amendment cases here. There are a lot of 14th Amendment cases. If that was what you wanted to start with in your study of the Constitution, or if you want to have a less structured lesson, you could even just send your students to landmark cases now that it is really student facing as well, and have them choose which ones they want to look at. And part of what they reported out or shared with the class might be what part of the Constitution was being interpreted in that particular case. So we're really proud of landmark cases now. For a while, it kind of had a lot of broken links and needed a lot of work, but we've done all of that work and we're super proud of it. The three new cases are Obergefell v. Hodges, Engel v. Vitale, and Schenk v. US. And if you're an AP Gov teacher, you probably recognize Engel and Schenk as two of the 14 required cases. So we not only have those landmark cases, we also have current cases. So these are cases we pick somewhere between 3 and 6 each year that we write up in the same way that the landmark cases are written up in these case summaries. Whoops, that's the wrong one. Sorry. In the case summaries that tell you all about the case, and we pick ones that are high student interest. I'm just going to show you a case summary really quickly if you're not familiar with them. So case summaries are all very similar. They have a background section, they have facts about the particular case, they talk about the issue that the Supreme Court decided, they have parts of the Constitution that are being interpreted, some precedents, and then they have arguments for both sides. If it's a case that's been decided, a landmark case or a past case, it will have a decision and summaries of the opinions as well. So obviously the cases that are currently before the court do not have that. So this gives students and teachers the opportunity to study the case, and Shalene is going to in a moment tell you about specifically doing a moot court. But studying the case in all sorts of different ways while it's actually being argued before the court, before it's been decided. Students find this really highly engaging because there's no right answer. So if you're wondering what kinds of cases we write up, one of the coolest parts of my job is that I get to decide what cases we're gonna write up, and I look for cases that are not super complicated with legal procedure, because some cases are interesting, but they're so in the weeds with procedure that it becomes difficult to teach in your classroom. Cases that are high interest to students, usually that come back to a constitutional and a really important constitutional question. And we try to sprinkle them out over the year too. So you always sort of have one that hasn't been decided. Although all of these cases were decided in the very last week of the term this year. That's how you can tell your case is a big case, when the Supreme Court waits for the last week to decide. So these were the cases we did this year. Counterman was about threats on the internet. Groff was about a postal worker who didn't want to work on Sundays. 303 Creative was about a website designer who didn't want to serve same-sex couples. And Students for Fair Admission cases, the two of them were companion cases, and they were about affirmative action in college admissions. The case that is about to come out, like, it is actually on the website. We haven't put it on social media yet, but if you went right now to our website, you would find O'Connor Ratcliffe v. Garnier. It is a case about school board members who blocked parents on Facebook and Twitter, and whether or not that was a First Amendment violation. There's a question that I'm going to take right now just because I caught it out of the corner of my eye. before Shalina talks about moots, and that's about how our lessons adjusted for middle school students. When we change our when we adapt our high school case summaries to middle school, we oftentimes take out the precedents, except the very most important ones, because they're probably not as focused on applying precedent. They have a glossary. So in the high school one, we never assume that students or teachers know legal vocabulary. But in the high school ones, we oftentimes, define it in the text itself. And in the middle school one, that happens, but there's also an accompanying glossary. We try to take it down several lexicon levels as far as we can. And we just try to take out as many of the details as we can without losing the integrity of the case. It's kind of difficult, to be honest, but we work really hard at trying to make them middle school accessible. And certainly, if you take a look at our middle school, oh, thank you. Ben just put the link to O'Connor Ratcliffe Garnier in the chat. If you're a middle school teacher using our resources and you have suggestions, we are always open to them. Okay, Shalina.
Thank you, Kathy. So if you have never used moot courts in your classroom or role played an appellate or Supreme Court hearing, this is the guide for you. These 10 lessons will lead you from the beginning to the end as to how to lead a moot court proceeding. For instance, this year or this semester, we just introduced our moot court problem with our students. We're using the 4th and the 14th Amendment this year for our problem. But lessons 1 and 2 give your students the background to the court system. And then lessons 3 through 9 guide you through the moot court process. Many of us don't have the time to go through a full moot court 10 lessons. And if that is the case, or 9 lessons, if that's the case for you, you can always use lesson 10, which is the mini moot courts. In 90 minutes, it takes you through the beginning and end of a case that you can really focus in on with your students to get them to understand the relevance of the problem and go through the procedure with learning skills such as independent analysis, critical thinking, and decision making. And then we can go to the next slide.
I want to mention before we go to the next slide that that we're also really proud of this. You'll see that it's been recently updated in 2021, and Shalina was also one of our 2 teachers who helped us make this, and our classroom guide to mock trials as well. Really an excellent source, because not only did we have lots of legal experts contributing to it, but we also had teachers who were out there teaching it in 2 very different schools in 2 very different places in the country. And Shalina was a huge contribution to the moot courts guide. Had to get that in there.
And then lastly, this slide really gives you recommendations for moot courts, really focusing in on like the First Amendment, the 8th Amendment, 4th Amendment, all amendments that students would really be interested in and want to know more about because they see it in their real lives. And so really, when you get to the guide, take a look and see which ones your students would be most interested in and go with that, because that's where you'll get the most bang for your buck.
And I have to put a plug in for Tyson Timms in a 2012 Land Rover v. State of Indiana. So if you are an AP government teacher and have to teach selective incorporation, and you're like, oh, it's so dry, how do I teach selective incorporation in a really engaging way? This is a fantastic case. It's about whether the excessive fines clause in the 8th Amendment apply. It is the very last part of an amendment to be incorporated. It just happened, you can see, in 2019. And kids love this case. It's about a guy who bought an expensive car and got caught with some drugs, and his car was taken by the police. And students just love this case, and it takes a really, I think, maybe not so tangible or exciting concept and makes it really exciting. I will put our disclaimer that we always use when we talk about moot courts is we are very careful when we pick the cases we encourage people to moot. As a matter of fact, This year, I talked about 303 Creative being one of the cases that we wrote up, the current cases. We actually put a little disclaimer and said, we have lots of other activities you can do with these cases. You probably don't want to actually moot it, but certainly with the landmark cases, be very careful. Just take a moment to think about what position you're putting students in when you're asking them to argue, a certain side of a case. Somebody asked, can mini moot court be used for any of these cases? Any of them. And if you, I'll just go back one more time. If you go to the moot court guide, the last lesson is about mini moot courts. When you think of a moot court, you usually think of the 9 justices up here and then a couple students arguing in front of the 9 justices. That's what a classic moot court looks like. But in a mini moot court, they're usually teams of 3 or 6, so every student has to really be fully engaged in the lesson. And if you go to that lesson, or if you go in our resource library, there is a less than 5 minute video that will show you a moot court being done in a classroom. A lot of teachers really prefer the moot court. We wanted to ask you to do one last poll, if you don't mind, and that is, we would love to know what you are most likely to use. So I'm going to launch that poll. If you already used one, that's probably the one you've been most likely to use. You'll be most likely to use. But we're really curious what teachers are actually using in their classroom. We know legal timelines is really new, but that's one of the reasons that we like to put it in front of people, because we think it's a fantastic resource. Somebody said, where can I find the aliens activity? Can you drop the link? Yes, absolutely. You can find it within the rule of law curriculum. I will drop that link. So the rule of law curriculum is set up differently than most of our curricula, because it is in a Google form, in a Google Doc, because of all those extensions. It looks a little different than our classic curriculum, but you can find it in there under the fundamental rights. Okay, I'm going to end this poll because it looks like people and share. So people seem most likely to use landmark cases. That's great. And moot courts. So good. And the rule of law.
They're tied.
That's right. They're tied. Okay, good. I'm gonna save that information. I thank you for your feedback. Okay, so we wanted to save time for Q&A. We didn't save quite as much as we had hoped, but we did get there. We didn't completely run out of time. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A itself. You are welcome to drop questions in the Q&A. You're also welcome to put them in the chat. Now that there sort of isn't all the other stuff going into the chat, we'll be able to see them. Well,
it looks like Dr. Linda Townsend said, if a school does not honor or engage in Constitution Day activities, are there any repercussions?
So I don't believe there are. It was part, it was kind of slipped in as a rider on in a spending bill, and I've read it completely. I didn't see anything where it said. You might think that a logical repercussion would be that you'd have your funding hold, because it says that anybody who gets funding has to do this, but there's nothing actually in there that says that, and I don't know that anyone's ever had any repercussions. But Shalina and I were talking about the fact that we were both teaching when it was first passed, and administrations took it very, very seriously at the beginning. I think that's waned a little bit, but maybe you can feel free to drop in the chat if your school still does. But I remember we had to have school-wide activities, we had to have bulletin boards, we had to have lunchtime activities, we had every teacher team had to submit a plan to our principal. He put it in like a folder that he kept in case, I don't know, the feds showed up and said, what did you do for Constitution Day? I don't know what they thought was going to happen. But we all took it very seriously at first, as far as like really documenting what was happening in the classroom. And I think now it's become more, you know, schools urge their teachers to do it, but feel free to drop in. Oh my gosh, yeah, there you go. So some people don't even know about it. Yeah. Yeah, and I assume that's really true if you're a newer teacher to the profession. I almost said younger, but that's not always the same thing, right? So I don't want to feed you questions, but if you have any questions for Shalina about how she adapts materials for her classroom, one of the things that she was really helpful with the classroom guide to moot courts and mock trials was to think about how to adapt things for different kinds of classrooms. And or if you want to put anything in the chat, like if you have a specific need, you have a specific standard you're trying to meet, or you're in a certain place in your curriculum. I know I taught in Virginia, and it was sometimes like the third day I saw my students, right? It was like the beginning of the school year, but I know some of you have been back for 5 weeks. So feel free to say like where you are. Okay, how do you access the program and the materials? So you can find everything is free. First of all, we are, a nonprofit and really committed to that. The only thing that isn't free for us is our textbooks, but nothing that I mentioned today is from the textbook. So everything can be found here at the address is a store. It kind of feels like a store, to be honest. Like you put things in your cart and then you check out. But it's never going to ask you for credit card information. You're never going to be charged for any of this stuff. It's just a sort of set up that way to make sure that we know where our materials are being used, because frankly, that helps us when we apply for grants and things to be able to say, like, there's been so many downloads of this one material. So that's what we use that information for when you put it in your cart and check out. But everything is there. Everything is free. I am going to put my email in the chat. Shalina is a full-time teacher, so we're not going to share her email, but if you have a burning question for Shalina, I'm happy to pass it on to her. But it is absolutely my job to help you find what you need. So there is my email, and you can feel free to reach out to me. And here, I'll put this last slide up. So there's my email. Again, I dropped it in the chat. But if you're maybe watching this recorded later, there's my email. And you can feel free to email me and again say, like, this is where I plan to be on September 17th, which is a Sunday. Again, it's been a Sunday for a couple of years in a row. So I guess you can choose whether you want to celebrate it on the Friday or the Monday. There's no, I don't think there's any hard and fast rule about where you celebrate it. I think a lot of people are doing programs and things on Monday. But you probably can have some flexibility about that. You can email me and say, this is what I plan to do that day. What are your suggestions for how I achieve that, whatever it is you're trying to do? I know some people have specific standards they're trying to meet that day, and some people just want to do something really engaging about the Constitution. So someone just asked, can you send the link? I can't send the link specifically to the activity. It's within the rule of law curriculum. So once you go to the rule of law curriculum, you choose the fundamental, I'll drop that again. You choose the fundamental rights lesson, but it doesn't have its own unique link to go straight to it. Sorry. So somebody says, Tori says, our district and school is very concerned with schools having a plan put together by the government teachers. That's how it always was at my school too. And we did something team-wide, so we could all say we did the same thing, but I'm not sure that that's the same everywhere. So there are a lot of people in the audience tonight who have been participants at the Supreme Court Summer Institute. So I will mention as my very last thing before we honor your time and get you out of here on time. Oh, okay, sorry. Ben just told me that I accidentally sent the rule of law curriculum just to the panelists. Sorry, thing defaults to only panelists. So I have to remember to change it to everyone. Sorry about that. Oh, my email too, he says. So thank you, Ben. And there's my email. So we want to honor your time. We want to not keep you over because every student and every teacher knows that that's a big no-no to make you stay late for class. But we do want to express our appreciation for you after a long day of teaching at the beginning of the school year, for spending your evening with us. And really, if I can help you with anything and make your planning easier, please just reach out, and I'm happy to do that. Have a great night.
Thank you all.